Hey guys, welcome to This Week in Games Like Zelda. This week's episode is the last episode got me kind of thinking that that my perception of Zelda back then wasn't necessarily extremely limited to overhead perspective, because this was back when Zelda II: The Adventure of Link wasn't that old. It had only been out for a few years or so. One of the aspects, of course, that we all know about Zelda II: The Adventure of Link is that it's a side-scrolling action RPG, much more RPG than any other Zelda game. And there was a game released shortly after that called Battle of Olympus, which I'm not going to cover because I never finished it. I remember renting it and playing it and thinking, this is kind of like Adventure of Link, but even harder, so I'm all good with that, thanks. But then I played, on the Super Nintendo, this game, Wanderers from Ys. What I didn't know at the time is that this is the third game in a series. I just thought it was its own standalone thing. And now this game plays out very similar to Adventure of Link in that it's a side-scrolling action RPG where you're a guy who has a sword, and you know, you've got potions that can refill your life and so on. And you gain levels, which improves your strength and stamina and HP and magic points and all of that too. I hadn't really played anything else besides Adventure of Link and Battle of Olympus that was really kind of like that, so the whole time I kept thinking, wow, they could maybe do a Zelda game that is a side-scroller again, and it would be pretty awesome, because Wanderers from Ys was pretty awesome. Now, the strange thing about this game is, like I said, it's the third game in a series. I don't know that the first and second games were ever released on a Nintendo console until recently. Nintendo put them on their Virtual Console for the Wii. So I think you had to have played them on other systems, and I was and am and probably always will be a Nintendo fanboy. I do have other systems, but Nintendo's my primary focus and always has been. So it being the third game in a series, it assumes you already know the main character and his sidekick friend. But I didn't really feel like it was like I was suddenly dropped into a story that I didn't know anything about. They did a good job at, even though it's the third game in a series, kind of presenting all the pertinent information that you would possibly need to know if you've never played those other two games. The main character is this guy who's kind of like Link. Throughout the entire series of Ys games, he never talks, or you never hear him talk. So I think maybe that's what kind of made me think, hey, this is kind of like Zelda. His sidekick is this guy named Dogi, or Doji. I really don't know which way to pronounce it, but I'm pretty sure it's not Doggy. It was kind of his enemy, it turns out, in the first game, but we won't get into the first game or anything. But anyway, so he and Dogi are traveling buddies. There are also hints that they might be a little bit more than traveling buddies. They decide to go visit Dogi's old hometown, Felgahana. I have no idea if that's how it's pronounced. And then when they get to Felgahana, they find out that all hell is broken loose, and that one of Dogi's friends is now a bad guy, and so they've got who's kind of like serving this bigger bad guy, who's serving this bigger bad guy. So they've got to do all this stuff to kind of get the land back to happy times. The reason why I felt this was so much like Zelda is simply that it was a side-scrolling action RPG, and that the main character didn't really talk that much. Not a whole lot else. There aren't really any puzzles in this game. There's a lot of, you must use this item to open up this kind of thing, but usually those items only serve one purpose or something. The story is actually pretty awesome. There's a whole lot of which side is this one character on, good or bad, and then Dogi goes through his whole, you know, I want to be good to my old friends, but I know that what I used to be doing was wrong, and so he has his own character, internal struggles. It's a pretty interesting game story-wise, and the gameplay is really interesting and fun. Now, talking about the gameplay, what's really strange about this in retrospect is that having played a lot of other Ys games since, this game, just like Adventure of Link, is the black sheep of the Ys family because it's the only Ys game that does the side-scrolling action RPG thing. All other Ys games are an overhead perspective. And I think that's why it really feels so much like this is the Ys Adventure of Link to me. What they did years later is, I think it was for the PlayStation 2, they remade this game in Japan. It was a Japanese-only release with much better graphics and updated the dialogue and story a little bit to be a little more interesting. But ultimately, it was exactly the same. And then just shortly after that, they went ahead and did a complete remake and turned it into an overhead perspective game with 3D models and a lot better graphics. So they've kind of been playing around with it because it has a really good story, so I think they're really interested in trying to present it in the best possible way. My advice is, if you're interested in playing this game and you can't decide whether you want to try out the original side-scrolling version or the updated graphics side-scrolling version or the overhead perspective, my personal preference is the overhead perspective one is a whole lot better. It has a lot more interesting items and spells, the characters and dialogue, and the plot is rewoven a little bit to be even more interesting. And you also have a lot of different options for playing it. In English, you can only play it, I think, on the PSP at this point. I don't think they ever made an official English version for the PC. What you can do, however, I know, is purchase the Japanese CD-ROM or the download of it, and then there's been a fan translation patch that you can add to that. But the overhead perspective remake is really the way to go, I think. So that's been this week's episode of Games Like Zelda. Next week's episode, we're going to be talking about a game that's a whole lot more popular. And I think you've probably definitely heard of this one. And I think it's my second favorite game of all time. What is this game? Shh, it's a secret.